She'd spent 2 years running from the sky because she'd killed 3 American soldiers. Now, 35,000 feet above ground with 275 passengers depending on her, Elena Cross had exactly 40 minutes to remember why she was once called the most lethal A-10 pilot alive, and to forgive herself for her worst mistake. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The captain's coffee cup sits on the beverage cart, and Elena Cross knows something is wrong. Not because of the cup itself, small oversight, happens all the time on commercial flights. But because of when it appeared. She watched him drink from it 20 minutes ago in the galley, watched him wipe his mouth, watched him turn toward the cockpit. Now it sits abandoned, still steaming, forgotten in a way that violates every protocol Elena learned in 8 years of military flying. She doesn't move. Doesn't alert anyone. Instead, she turns another page in her dog-eared paperback romance novel, the one with the shirtless man on the cover, and lets her eyes track the flight attendant walking the aisle with rehearsed smiles that don't quite reach her eyes. Seat 18C. Middle of the cabin. Completely unremarkable. Elena Cross is very good at being unremarkable. She's 34 years old, sunburnt nose, Mickey ears pin on her backpack next to the Cinderella Castle and Space Mountain keepsakes. The cargo shorts have a Minnie Mouse stain on the left thigh, authentic, from the ice cream cone she dropped on day 2 of her 4-day Orlando trip. Her sneakers are beaten-up Converses, the kind that scream, comfortable vacation shoes, and she's clutching a stuffed Stitch doll like she actually bought it for a kid back home instead of for herself, for comfort, for the weight of something soft when the nightmares get too real at 3 in the morning. The businessman in 18D glanced at her twice during boarding and then looked away, having already categorized her, exhausted mom, probably a teacher on spring break, definitely someone who spent $200 she didn't have on park tickets and overpriced churros. The college students in 18B had seen the Disney shirt and smiled sympathetically, that look people give to adults trying to hold on to childhood. Nobody was looking at her twice. Nobody was looking at her. Because they didn't know that beneath the sunburnt nose and souvenir pin sat Major Elena Reaper Cross, USAF, retired, call sign earned not for confirmed kills, though she had plenty, but for her ability to stay over the battlefield longer than any other pilot. Stay, and stay, and stay, until the last round was fired, until the last friendly soldier was accounted for, until even death itself got bored waiting for her to leave. She'd flown 156 combat missions across 8 years. She'd made gun runs at altitude so low her wing tips had clipped tree branches, the rush of ground fire turning the sky into metal rain. She'd brought her damaged A-10 Warthog home on one engine and a prayer, hydraulics leaking, airframe screaming, but wheels down, canopy open, alive. She'd saved surrounded platoons in the darkness before dawn, destroyed enemy armor formations, pulled her eject handle exactly 0 times because she didn't leave her people behind. The Warthog wasn't built to be beautiful. It was built to be brutal. A flying tank with a nose cannon that fired 30mm depleted uranium rounds at 4,000 rounds per minute, enough firepower to level a city block if you held the trigger down. And Elena had been one of the best Warthog pilots in the entire United States Air Force. Not because she was reckless. But because she was methodical, precise, and completely committed to the idea that every soldier on the ground deserved to come home. The businessman to her left had no idea those hands, now holding a trashy beach novel, had once gripped that control stick with absolute authority at 10,000 feet, orchestrating violence with surgical precision. He had no idea those soft eyes, probably watery from sun and chlorine at water parks, had scanned targeting pods and identified military positions with the intensity of someone whose mistakes meant body bags. The young woman reading her Instagram feed across the aisle didn't know that Elena's eyes were cataloging exits, counting rows to emergency doors, identifying the 2 strongest male passengers within her section while appearing to be absorbed in a mediocre plot twist about a love triangle that didn't matter. Elena didn't fly anymore. Hadn't touched aircraft controls in 2 years, 3 months, and 17 days. She kept count because counting was easier than thinking. She'd walked away from the sky because the sky had demanded she carry weight she couldn't put down. The kind of weight that doesn't get lighter with time, just more familiar, like stones in a backpack you forget you're wearing until someone asks you why you walk hunched. But old instincts don't die. They just wait. They sleep like predators, and sometimes, just sometimes, they wake up. The flight attendant, name tag reads Martinez, reappears from the forward galley, and Elena watches her face in the tiny reflection of her book's glossy cover. The smile is gone. Real worry etches lines around her mouth, the kind that comes from knowing something passengers shouldn't know yet. The kind of knowing that paralyzes flight crews because protocol doesn't account for terror. Elena's tactical awareness, dormant but never truly sleeping, suddenly comes online like a weapons system powering up. Like her brain remembered what it was trained for and didn't ask permission. She closes her book. Doesn't make it obvious. Just slides a bookmark in, the kind of thing a tourist would do, and lets her eyes drift out the window at the clouds passing 40,000 feet below. They've been climbing toward cruising altitude for about 90 minutes. The flight is smooth. The weather is clear. But there's a tension in the cabin now, barely perceptible, the kind only someone trained to notice would catch. Martinez walks back to the intercom. Elena's hearing, honed by years of communicating over jet engines and radio static loud enough to vibrate bone, picks up the urgency in her voice even though she's too far away to hear words. Then Martinez glances up toward the cockpit. Worry flickers across her features before she masks it again with that professional smile that doesn't reach her eyes. Elena's pulse hasn't elevated. Her breathing stays steady. But something inside her, some part of her that was trained to recognize emergencies before they announce themselves, before the first distress call is made, is suddenly very, very awake. The captain was drinking coffee. Alone in the galley. An unusual moment of vulnerability, the kind that only other military personnel would note. And now he's missing from his post, his coffee forgotten, and the flight attendant is scared in the specific way people get scared when they know something terrible is happening but don't understand it yet. Medical emergency. Has to be. Nothing else makes sense at 35,000 feet. But her gut says something worse. 3 minutes pass. Elena watches without watching, a skill you learn when surveillance matters but you need to remain invisible. A flight attendant whispers to another crew member near the rear galley. Their eyes flick toward passengers, that specific kind of assessment people do when they're trying to figure out what resources they have available. One person who can help. One person who might know CPR. One person who's a doctor. These are the calculations flight crews make when something breaks in the sky and they're the only help that exists. One flight attendant disappears into the forward galley and doesn't come back out. The seatbelt sign illuminates. No announcement. Just the chime and the light, which causes a subtle ripple of confusion through the cabin. There's no turbulence, no weather warning, no announcement explaining the reason. Why would you turn on the seatbelt sign when the flight's been smooth as glass? Elena fastens hers. Everyone around her is doing the same, confused, the way tourists and casual travelers are, fumbling slightly, uncertain. Not the way a tactical mind does it. Elena doesn't just buckle. She tests the mechanism, assesses the padding, ensures she can unbuckle in under a second if needed. Her fingers verify the latch works smoothly twice before she releases it. Old habits from ejection seat procedures don't disappear. Then the announcement comes, crisp and professional despite the fear underneath. Ladies and gentlemen, if there is a doctor on board, please press your call button immediately. We have a medical emergency. Doctor on board, please identify yourself. This is not a drill. Medical emergency. Standard enough. Elena has been on commercial flights before, always as a passenger, never again as crew. That door closed 2 years ago. She's heard medical emergency announcements. They happen. Passenger has a heart attack. Passenger has a seizure. Someone's diabetic and their blood sugar crashed. Standard, manageable. But Elena's eyes catch the slight acceleration of Martinez's movements as she hurries to prepare what looks like a medical kit from the galley. There's a tremor in her hands. Fear tremor, not normal tremor, not the tremor of someone managing a routine situation. Two possibilities spin through Elena's mind with the speed of a tactical computer: passenger medical event, which happens on flights regularly, maybe once every 1,000 flights, or crew medical event, which is rarer, more serious, more catastrophic. But the urgency, the way Martinez disappeared into the cockpit instead of toward the cabin seating where passengers sit, the way the other flight attendants are making those specific eye contact assessments. The aircraft lurches. Not turbulence. Elena has flown through thunderstorms that would terrify civilian pilots, through hail that dented her canopy and wind shear that nearly ejected her sideways. She knows what turbulence feels like. This is something else. This is a sudden altitude change, uncorrected, the kind a commercial autopilot doesn't make and shouldn't make. This is the aircraft responding to a manual input. Someone in the cockpit just adjusted the aircraft manually, and they did it badly. Passengers around her gasp. A drink spills in the aisle, cola spreading across the carpet. Elena doesn't react outwardly, but every nerve ending ignites like a weapon going hot. The plane levels after 5 seconds, 5 seconds that feel like 5 minutes when you understand what they mean, and the movement smooths again. But the damage is done. The cockpit is no longer flying on autopilot. Someone has taken manual control. And whoever has manual control doesn't know what they're doing. Elena unbuckles. The businessman next to her glances over, but she's already moving into the aisle with purpose. A flight attendant, a young man, maybe 25, with a name tag that reads David, hurries toward her with a forced smile, the kind trained into every flight attendant at Flight Academy. "Ma'am, please return to your..." "Both pilots are down," Elena says quietly. "Military hard." No question mark at the end because it's not a question. It's a statement of fact, because she can read the evidence like intelligence from a recon flight. That's why you needed a doctor. That's why the plane just dropped. Someone's fighting for control up there, and they're not a pilot. David's professional mask cracks like thin ice. His face goes pale. The color drains from his cheeks in a way that confirms everything Elena just said. She's right. Both pilots. Incapacitated. And the aircraft is being hand-flown by someone who has no business touching the controls. "Ma'am, I..." The aircraft drops again. Hard. This time not corrected smoothly but with a violent surge that throws Elena against the armrest. Around her, passengers scream, genuine terror, the kind that comes from feeling the aircraft fall beneath them. Overhead bins pop open. Luggage tumbles into the aisle. A child 3 rows back cries. The plane levels, but the movements are wrong: nose up, nose down, yaw to the left, then a correction that overshoots, the aeronautical equivalent of someone fighting a steering wheel they don't understand, someone who learned how to fly from a YouTube video and is now trying to execute a commercial landing. Elena's hands instinctively reach for the nearest seat to steady herself, and her muscle memory recognizes what's happening with absolute clarity. A pilot in command is completely incapacitated, and someone with minimal to zero flight training is trying to hand-fly a Boeing 767. A 767 is a massive aircraft, heavier than most fighter jets by a factor of 10. It doesn't respond like a small plane. It doesn't forgive. It requires firm authority and precise inputs. Someone in that cockpit is panicking, and 275 people are about to find out what happens when civilian aircraft require military precision. The intercom crackles. A woman's voice, shaking so hard Elena can hear the fear vibrating through the speaker, distorting the transmission. This is Flight Attendant Martinez. We have an emergency. Both pilots are unconscious. I repeat, both pilots are incapacitated. A pause, and when she speaks again, there's a plea beneath the words, something that sounds almost like prayer. If there is anyone on board with flight experience, anyone who can fly, please identify yourself immediately. Silence. 275 people. 275 heartbeats. And in that silence, Elena understands that every single one of them is waiting for someone else to be the answer. Every one of them is hoping that someone braver, smarter, more qualified than they are will stand up and say, "I can save you." She walks to the cockpit door. David reaches out, his hands shaking. "Ma'am, you can't." Elena pulls her wallet from her cargo shorts pocket. She doesn't need to, but it's better this way, better to show, not tell. She flips to a card she's carried for 2 years without ever wanting to use it again, FAA commercial pilot license, properly signed and dated, multi-engine type rating. And below that, military credentials. USAF Major. Service number. Call sign, Reaper. The photo shows a woman in uniform, hair pulled back, eyes focused, jaw set. A woman who belongs in a cockpit. David's eyes go wide. "I need you to open this door," Elena says, and her voice is completely different now. Not tourist. Not the woman reading romance novels about impossible love. The voice of someone who has made life and death decisions at 4,000 feet, who has orchestrated close air support in darkness, who has saved lives by being absolutely certain about her actions. Right now. David fumbles with the door code. His hands shake as he enters numbers. But the door opens. Chaos. The captain slumped over the yoke, completely unconscious, his head resting against the side window. The first officer in his seat, also unconscious, body listing to the left, his hand still loosely gripping the armrest. Their radio headsets still on, still connected, and Elena can hear Seattle Air Traffic Control trying to reach them with increasing desperation. United 926, respond. 926, report your status immediately. The aircraft is on autopilot, technically stable but descending at a shallow angle because someone, Martinez, probably, in a panic trying to help, hit the altitude select knob with shaking hands while attempting CPR, and now the plane is flying itself toward the ground, 100 feet per minute sinking toward the earth. In 40 minutes, they'll be at 10,000 feet. In 50, they'll be at ground level. Martinez sits in the observer seat, her hands hovering over controls she doesn't understand, her eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "I didn't know what to do, they just collapsed. I tried CPR but nothing." The captain's coffee, he said it tasted weird, like almonds, and then 5 minutes later the first officer complained he couldn't see straight, said everything was blurry, and then they both just. She gestures helplessly at the unconscious pilots. "I don't know what to do." "Out," Elena commands. "Everyone out. Now. Close the door and keep everyone away. I need space to work." Martinez bolts. David follows. The cockpit door closes with a hydraulic hiss, and Elena is alone with 2 unconscious pilots and the responsibility for 275 lives hanging in the air above them like a weight suspended from a single thread. Elena slides into the captain's seat. Her hands find the controls, different from her A-10, heavier response, different speed, different everything about how you manage lift and drag on a commercial aircraft. The A-10 is a fighter. Fast, aggressive, responds to input like an extension of your nervous system. The Boeing 767 is a transport. Heavy, stable, wants to fly level more than it wants to turn. But the fundamental truth remains unchanged: something flies, something tries to fall, and a pilot's job is to negotiate the difference between the two. Throttles. Yoke. Autopilot panel. Muscle memory from 156 combat missions and 8 years of military flying takes over, pushing aside 2 years of guilt, trauma, and deliberate forgetting. Elena's hands move with absolute certainty born from thousands of hours in a cockpit. First action: stop the descent. She disconnects the autopilot and manually corrects the pitch, raising the nose with smooth pressure on the yoke. The altimeter reading stabilizes. 35,000 feet holding. The descent arrested. The aircraft no longer falling toward the earth but holding steady in the sky. Second, Assess the threats. Both pilots breathing, pulses present but slow. Bradycardia, probably, not tachycardia. Something in their systems is slowing them down. Poisoning. Gas exposure. Hypoxia. Doesn't matter. They're not flying. She is. Her eyes scan the instruments. Altitude, 35,000 feet. Airspeed, 480 knots, stable. Fuel, adequate. Heading, 295 degrees true. Outside temperature, -57 Celsius. All the data that defines their universe at this moment. United 926, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Elena's voice is ice over the radio, professional, calm, the voice of someone who has trained for exactly this moment in 100 simulator sessions and in her mind 1,000 times since retirement. Both pilots incapacitated. Passenger pilot assuming control. I am military trained A-10 pilot, not current on commercial procedures. Need immediate assistance and vectors to nearest suitable airport. Static. The void where communication lives. Then, 926, say again, did you say passenger pilot? Affirmative. Major Elena Cross, United States Air Force, A-10 Warthog pilot. I have 156 combat hours and currently have control of this aircraft. I need vectors to nearest suitable airfield and talk-down guidance for landing procedures. Standing by. A longer pause. Elena is already thinking through the variables, fuel consumption at this weight and altitude, distance to suitable airports, runway requirements for a 767, descent rates, approach patterns. She's already calculating whether she has enough fuel to reach Seattle-Tacoma International, maybe 45 minutes away if she manages descent and approach correctly. Then, 926, this is Seattle Center. We copy all your information and we're clearing airspace ahead of you. Major Cross, can you maintain control of that aircraft? Elena's hands grip the yoke. The last time she flew, she had control. She had coordinates. She pulled the trigger. 4 seconds later her wingman screamed, abort. Those are friendlies, over the radio, and Elena learned what guilt felt like when it moves faster than sound, when it travels at the speed of 30 mm rounds leaving a cannon. 3 American soldiers died. 5 wounded. All because she trusted the wrong coordinates. All because someone, somewhere, made an error in military intelligence and Elena paid the price in the faces she sees every time she closes her eyes. She hasn't touched a flight control in 2 years because she couldn't trust herself. Couldn't trust that her judgment was sound. Couldn't trust that history wouldn't repeat itself. But right now, 275 people are depending on her to remember that she knows how to land. Depending on her to fly through the doubt and the guilt and the 2 years of running away from the sky. Affirmative, Elena says quietly, and her voice doesn't shake. I have control. The next 40 minutes are a masterclass in controlled fear. Elena handflies the Boeing 767 using combat pilot skills that controllers find terrifying but that are absolutely correct. She makes inputs that seem aggressive on the radio, steep descent rates, rapid configuration changes, speed brake deployment that would make civilian pilots uncomfortable, but are entirely managed, entirely safe. She treats the 767 like her A-10, respect the machine, understand its limits, fly it hard but fly it safe. Behind her, Martinez and David are keeping the cabin calm through sheer force of professionalism, telling passengers that the pilots needed to rest but that qualified help is in control. Elena doesn't hear the panic that's definitely rippling through 275 people realizing their pilots are unconscious and their aircraft is being flown by someone they've never heard of, someone they only know is a military pilot, and nothing about military pilots in emergency situations sounds reassuring. But she feels it. Feels the weight of it pressing against the cockpit door. Feels 275 human beings holding their breath, praying, crying, trying to call loved ones on phones that don't work at 35,000 feet. The PTSD hits without warning. She's on her combat approach, visual on the runway, 4,000 feet altitude, configuring for landing, when the targeting pod appears in her mind. She's back in her cockpit over hostile territory, 10,000 feet, the sun painting everything gold. Her targeting pod is lit up with enemy coordinates glowing green on her helmet-mounted display. Ground control just confirmed, Reaper, you are cleared to engage target grid. Good killing. Her finger is on the trigger. The cannon fires, CH. The recoil shudders through the airframe, a vibration so familiar it's almost comforting. For 4 seconds, depleted uranium rounds pour from her nose, thousands of rounds per minute, tearing through a building, and then... Abort. Reaper, abort. Abort. Those are friendlies. I say again, those are friendlies. Cease fire immediately. Her wingman's scream echoes through 2 years. Through every night. Through every morning she wakes up and remembers that she killed Americans. That her error, no, not her error, the intelligence was wrong, but she was the one who pulled the trigger, resulted in flag-draped caskets. Elena's hands shake on the yoke of the 767. Sweat drips down her temple despite the cold cockpit. The runway is still 40 miles away. She's at 3,000 feet and descending, and every instrument, every control surface, every moment of this flight is taking her backward instead of forward. One of the unconscious pilots slumps further in his seat. Elena pulls focus. Returns to the present. The runway is coming. 275 people are depending on her. She can't fall apart. Not now. Not when it matters. She keyed the radio with shaking hands. Seattle Center, United 926, continuing descent, current altitude 3,000 feet, need talk down on approach. Copy, 926. We're setting you up for runway 16 left. Current conditions are VFR, light winds, visibility unlimited. You're cleared for a straight-in approach. But then a new voice cuts in. Military. Calm. Confident. Familiar. United 926, this is Hog Lead. A-10 flight out of Mountain Home Air Force Base. 2-ship formation, and we're vectoring to your position for visual escort. A pause. And Major Cross. Reaper, ma'am, it's an honor. We know your record. We know who you are. Elena's breath catches. They sent a TENS. Her aircraft. Her people. The last voice she expected to hear in the sky was another Warthog pilot. The last thing she expected to feel was less alone in the sky, because the sky had felt like an enemy for 2 years. Hog Lead, Reaper, she responds, and her voice steadies by increments. Good to hear friendly voices. Ma'am, we heard what happened to you. We heard about the friendly fire incident. We're sorry. We're sorry for what you carried. The voice is genuine, no pretense, just pilot to pilot across the frequency. But you're still Reaper to us. You're still one of the best pilots who ever flew the Hog. And today you're gonna save 275 people. We're with you all the way down. We're not leaving you. You're not alone up there. Elena's vision blurs with tears. Her hands grip the yoke, and she lets herself cry, not breaking down, not losing control, but acknowledging the weight, acknowledging that someone understands. And for the first time in 2 years, she lets herself remember not the last mission, not the 3 soldiers she couldn't save, but the 37 missions before that. The 43 missions after. The 150 flights where she got it right. Where people came home. Where the world was a little bit safer because she was in the sky. Copy, Hog Lead. Copy all. Her voice is thick with emotion. Let's bring them home. The runway appears in the distance, and Elena's tactical mind shifts into landing configuration. She's landed on damaged runways before. Combat landing at Bagram with a shattered hydraulic system and warning lights flooding the cockpit. Diverted to a highway during desert warfare, landing on concrete meant for cars, not a multi-million-dollar aircraft. Brought a wounded warthog down in a crosswind that would make most pilots bail out, eject, let the insurance handle it. But she's never landed a commercial airliner. Never handled something this heavy, this fast, this utterly unforgiving. The 767 doesn't forgive mistakes. It doesn't have the performance reserve of a fighter. The A-10 pilots are coaching her now, voices professional but underlined with something deeper, respect, she thinks, or maybe just understanding. Two of their own, in a different kind of battle. Easy on the descent rate, Reaper. This bird's heavier than your hog. Give yourself more room, Hog Lead advises, his voice guiding her like a shepherd. You're doing good. Just like training, just like you practiced 1,000 times. Elena adjusts. Shallower descent angle. More gentle approach speed. But the fundamentals remain unchanged: identify the runway, manage energy, align with centerline, touchdown, reverse thrust, land. It's still flying. And flying is what she does. The ground controller is almost frantic. 926, your approach to runway 16 left, wind 350 at 8 knots, traffic is cleared, emergency equipment standing by. Standing by. Code for there are fire trucks and ambulances waiting at the end of the runway, because they don't know if she can land this thing and they're prepared for disaster. For fire. For casualties. For the probability that this will end badly. The runway is 2 miles away now. Elena is high and fast, her descent rate too aggressive, her approach speed too high. Every instrument is screaming that she's not going to make it, that she's going to land long, that she's going to run off the runway or, worse, her approach will fail entirely and she'll have to go around and try again, hemorrhaging fuel, burning toward a fuel emergency. Reaper, you're hot and high, Hog Lead warns. His tone is not critical. It's supportive. It's the voice of someone who understands that she's doing her best and believes in her. You've got this. Back it down, bleed some energy. Copy. I'm managing. Elena uses techniques from combat flying. Aggressive speed breaks, bleeds energy with every control input. Steep descent rate, steeper than any commercial procedure, steeper than any civilian pilot would attempt. But she's not a civilian. Not right now. She's a combat pilot executing a combat landing because that's the only framework she has left for saving lives. The runway expands. The touchdown zone defines itself. 1,000 feet above the surface now. 800. The controllers are silent, they've handed her over to the universe and to muscle memory. 500 feet. Elena's hands are absolutely steady. The PTSD is still there, she'll hear that cannon fire for the rest of her life, probably, will see those 3 soldiers' faces in her peripheral vision forever, but she's flying through it. Flying past it. Because 275 people are breathing on this aircraft and every single one of them is depending on her to remember that she knows how to land. That one mistake 2 years ago doesn't erase 8 years of doing it right. 300 feet. The landing lights illuminate the runway in perfect focus. 100 feet. 50. 40, she murmurs, talking herself down like she did 1,000 times in combat, talking to herself the way pilots talk to themselves when the margin for error has become 0. 30. 20. 10. The wheels touch. Hard. Passengers scream. Elena feels the impact reverberating through her bones, through the seat, through the yoke. She immediately cuts the throttles and engages reverse thrust. The aircraft lurches as the engines reverse, bleeding their forward momentum. The runway rushes beneath them at 140 miles per hour, then 100, then 80. The aircraft is decelerating. They're going to stop. They're going to be okay. At 30 miles per hour, Elena pulls back on the throttle, and the 767 coasts to a gentle stop, centered on the runway, exactly as trained. She sits in absolute silence for 3 seconds. Then she keys the radio, Seattle Center, United 926. All passengers and crew accounted for. Aircraft secure. Thank you for the assist, Hog Lead. You saved my life out there. A pause. Then, 926, welcome to Seattle. Medical personnel are rolling to your position. The ground controller's voice cracks slightly. And Major Cross. That was the finest piece of flying we've ever seen. Welcome home, ma'am. Welcome home. Behind her, Martinez opens the cockpit door. She sees Elena still in her Disney shirt, sunburnt nose, the Mickey ears pinned still on her backpack. The contradiction is so profound. This woman who looks like she rode Space Mountain 4 hours ago has just landed a commercial airliner with 275 people aboard. Get medical to the cockpit, Elena says. Her voice is back to normal now, professional, the edge gone. Both pilots need immediate evaluation. Suspected poisoning or neurological event. Fast onset, both incapacitated simultaneously. Could be airborne toxin or contaminated substance. Treat as hazmat until proven otherwise. Martinez stares at her. Who, what are you? Elena removes her headset. Her military ID is still in her back pocket. Her commercial pilot's license is still in her wallet. She's still the same person she was 10 minutes ago. But the weight has changed somehow. Shifted. Become bearable. Someone who remembered who she was, Elena says quietly. Now go. People need you. The next 6 hours are controlled chaos. Emergency medical services swarm the cockpit. Both pilots are rushed to Harborview Medical Center by ambulance in a convoy of sirens. Initial blood work comes back showing traces of ricin, weaponized, concentrated, almost certainly delivered through the captain's coffee by someone with access to the galley. The coffee was his ritual, his comfort drink at the start of every flight. Someone knew that. A terrorism investigation launches immediately. Federal law enforcement. TSA agents. FBI field office out of Seattle. The FAA is already requesting depositions. United Airlines is in crisis management mode. Media is gathering outside the hospital like vultures sensing a feast. But the passengers are alive. All 275 of them emerge from the aircraft, shaken but unharmed. They see Elena in the terminal, still in her Disney shirt, the stuffed stitched doll now in her hands like a talisman, and something happens that she doesn't expect. They recognize her. Not because they know her name. Not because they saw her credentials. But because they know, on some instinctive level, that the woman who just landed their aircraft was trained to save lives and did exactly that. They hug her. They cry. They thank her. An older woman grabs her hand and just holds it, crying, unable to speak. A man kisses her cheek and calls her an angel. A child, maybe 7 years old, presents her with a drawing, a stick figure in a cockpit with, "You saved US," written underneath in crayon. Elena stands there in her tourist clothes and her sunburnt nose, and she lets herself be held. Lets herself feel what she's refused to feel for 2 years, that she matters. That her skills matter. That she's still valuable. The media descends like a tens on a convoy. CNN. MSNBC. Fox News. Local Seattle stations. Everyone wants a piece of the tourist who saved 275 lives. The story is irresistible: ordinary woman, Disney vacation, hidden military background, emergency landing, ricin poisoning, terrorism, every element a journalist dreams about. Within 4 hours, Elena's name is trending on Twitter with over 2 million mentions. Within 6 hours, her military record is public knowledge. Her call sign, Reaper, is on every news network. Her picture in uniform is being broadcast internationally. Her secret is out, spreading across the globe at the speed of light. There's a press conference in a terminal conference room. The National Transportation Safety Board is there. FAA officials. Representatives from United Airlines. FBI agents taking notes. Elena sits at a table facing about 50 journalists, and she looks at all of them and thinks about how absurd this is. 6 hours ago she was worried about whether she could fly commercially. Now the entire world wants to know her story. Major Cross, a reporter from the New York Times begins, "Why didn't you tell anyone you were a military pilot? Why were you hiding?" Elena thinks about her answer carefully. Thinks about the 3 soldiers. Thinks about 2 years of hiking trails and wilderness guides and pretending the sky didn't call to her every single day. Because 2 years ago, I made a mistake that killed 3 American soldiers, she says clearly, and the room goes utterly silent. Everyone stops taking notes. All eyes lock on her. Faulty intelligence, wrong coordinates, but ultimately my finger was on the trigger. I fired on what I thought was an enemy position. It was friendlies, American troops misidentified by faulty intelligence. 3 died immediately. 5 were wounded. The investigation cleared me. It wasn't technically my fault. But I couldn't clear myself. She pauses. Breathes. Continues. I resigned my commission. I left the Air Force. I moved to a small town in Oregon and I became a wilderness guide. I led tourists on hiking trips. I taught survival skills. I did everything I could to never touch an aircraft again. Because I didn't trust myself anymore. I couldn't forgive myself. But today, 275 people needed me to be the pilot I was trained to be. They needed Reaper. And I realized, she pauses, and her voice becomes quieter, more human, one terrible day doesn't erase 8 years of doing it right. One mistake doesn't erase 156 successful missions. I'm still a pilot. I just forgot that for a while. The question hangs in the air. Then another reporter, what was it like? Flying a commercial aircraft in an emergency? Terrifying, Elena admits, her voice steady despite everything. I had 156 combat flights in my logbook, but I'd never landed a commercial airliner. I was fighting my own fear and fighting the aircraft and fighting my own doubt. Every second, I was hearing my wingman scream, "Those are friendlies," and wondering if I was making the same mistake again. But the pilots who escorted me, the A-10 flight out of Mountain Home, they reminded me that I wasn't flying alone. That I was still part of something bigger than my guilt. So I flew for them. For the pilots who believed I could do it. For the 275 people who deserved to go home. 6 months later, Elena is back in uniform. Not active duty. She negotiated that carefully with Pentagon bureaucrats who wanted to immediately rehabilitate her publicly, who wanted to make her a hero again, a symbol of military pride. But Elena understood something they didn't: you can't erase trauma by erasing it from the record. You have to integrate it. You have to make peace with who you were and who you've become. A contract instructor position. Mountain Home Air Force Base. Teaching young A-10 pilots the finer points of close air support, weapons employment, and the tactical decisions that separate good pilots from great ones. The decisions that matter. The decisions that kill or save. She teaches at the same base where the flight that escorted her through her emergency originated. Where Hog lead, Captain James Morrison, it turns out, a veteran of 16 years and 247 missions, and his wingman Captain Sarah Chen became something like friends. Like brothers and sisters in arms. Like people who understood without needing explanation. She teaches in a classroom with large windows overlooking the flight line. When young pilots get frustrated, when they think they can't do it, when they doubt themselves, Elena tells them about the Disney shirt. About the 275 people. About what it feels like to land an aircraft and save lives when everything inside you is screaming that you're not good enough. The PTSD hasn't vanished. It probably never will. Elena is a realist about such things. Sometimes she hears the cannon fire, that distinctive BRRRT of the GAU-8/A Avenger cannon, so iconic it's almost a sound signature. Sometimes she sees the three soldiers' faces, though their names and details have faded to mercy, to the brain's natural protective mechanisms. Sometimes she wakes up from a nightmare where the landing fails and the aircraft cartwheels down the runway and 275 people become a statistic about pilot error. But on the good days, and there are more of them now, she flies. Not as a pilot, but sometimes she rides along as an instructor, sits in the back seat of an A-10 while a young pilot flies, and reminds them that fear is just information. That doubt is just your brain protecting you. That courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is flying anyway. One of her students approaches her after a training sortie. A young captain, fresh from flight school, with the eagerness and fear that every young combat pilot has. Her name is Rebecca Vasquez, and she's the kind of pilot Elena sees herself in, determined, skilled, questioning, human. "Ma'am, is it true you landed a 767 wearing a Disney shirt?" Rebecca asks, and there's wonder in her voice. Not mockery. Just genuine curiosity about how someone could be ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. Elena smiles. It's a real smile, not forced. It's true. And I learned something that day. You don't stop being a warrior when you put on tourist clothes. You're always who you train to be. The uniform doesn't make you a pilot. Your skills make you a pilot. Your courage makes you a pilot. And sometimes, saving lives means forgiving yourself enough to trust those skills again. Rebecca nods. She's probably heard Elena's story 100 times. Probably knows that Elena was part of the biggest aviation incident since U.S. Airways 1549. Everyone in the Air Force knows about Reaper. The pilot who came back. "Ma'am," Rebecca asks, hesitantly, "does it get easier?" The fear? Elena considers the question seriously. "No," she says honestly. "It doesn't get easier. But you get stronger. Fear doesn't decrease, your ability to move through it increases. That's the difference between a pilot and a really good pilot. The really good ones don't feel less fear. They just keep flying." As Rebecca walks away, Elena looks out toward the flight line where the A-10s are being prepared for tomorrow's training sorties. Their distinctive silhouettes, the bulbous fuselage, the massive nose cannon, the titanium bathtub that protects the pilot, her aircraft. The place where she learned who she was and almost lost herself. She thinks about Seat 18C. The Mickey ears pins. The stuffed Stitch doll, now sitting on a shelf in her BOQ room at the base. The bright pink, I Heart Suit Disney shirt, now framed on her office wall at the squadron, a reminder of what bravery looks like. The shirt, more than her military credentials or her combat record or her call sign, reminds her of something crucial: you don't have to look like a warrior to be one. You don't have to perform toughness or hardness or the absence of fear to be competent. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the sky is something everyone dismisses as ordinary. Elena walks toward the flight line. Tomorrow she'll teach. Tomorrow she'll climb into a briefing room with young pilots who are terrified of making mistakes. Tomorrow she'll tell them that the best pilots aren't the ones who never fail. They're the ones who fail and keep flying. Tomorrow she'll be Reaper again. But tonight, she walks past the A-10s in the darkness, and she touches the fuselage of one of them. The metal is cool beneath her palm. There's a name painted on the nose, Thunderhead, in faded letters. Not her aircraft. But her aircraft's descendant. Her legacy. The institution that refused to let her disappear into a small Oregon town and guided her back to where she belongs. At Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, 3,000 feet below where Elena now stands in the darkness of the flight line, 2 pilots are preparing for discharge. Captain Robert Haraway, the captain, will never remember drinking the ricin-laced coffee. His memory stops at breakfast, and the next thing he knows, he's waking up in an ICU with tubes in his arms and nurses explaining that a woman in a Disney shirt saved his life and the lives of everyone aboard his flight. He will retire from commercial aviation 6 months later, unable to reconcile the vulnerability with the responsibility. First Officer Marcus Chen will recover fully within 48 hours. He will testify before the FBI. He will work with the investigation that identifies the disgruntled mechanic, a man named David Prescott, fired 6 months earlier for safety violations, who had access to the galley and a vendetta against United Airlines. Prescott will face terrorism charges. Both pilots will attend a ceremony where Elena receives a commendation. They will try to thank her. She will deflect, telling them it's just what pilots do. But they'll understand, she means it. In the moment, there's no heroism. Just the job. Just the response. Just the muscle memory of training. They'll learn that sometimes, when everything goes wrong at 35,000 feet, an extraordinary person disguised as ordinary is exactly what you need. Elena never expected that to be her. She spent 2 years believing she was broken beyond repair, that one mistake defined her entirely, that she had no right to carry the rank of Major or the call sign Reaper. But she's learned to live with surprises. 1 year after the landing, Elena is promoted to full colonel. The Air Force wants her to command a squadron. She declines, choosing instead to expand her instructor role, to mentor more young pilots, to ensure that the lessons learned cost those 3 soldiers, cost 275 people terrified in a commercial airliner, don't get forgotten. She starts a program called Redemption Through Duty. It's designed to help pilots who've made mistakes, who've carried guilt, who've questioned whether they should still be flying. The program teaches that error is not failure. That trauma is not terminal. That one bad decision doesn't erase a career. Rebecca Vasquez becomes one of Elena's success stories. Young, talented, terrified of failure. Elena teaches her that fear and competence can coexist. Within 2 years, Rebecca is flying combat missions in a conflict zone and saving lives just like Elena once did. The cycle continues. On her 36th birthday, Elena receives a package. It's from Harborview Medical Center in Seattle. Inside is the Disney shirt, the exact pink "I Heart Suit Disney" shirt she wore on the flight, professionally cleaned and pressed. A note is attached in handwriting that's shaky but genuine. Major Cross, we wanted you to have this. A reminder of who you were when we needed you most. Thank you for coming back to the sky. Thank you for saving us. You're not just our pilot. You're our hero. The 275-inch. Elena holds the shirt, and she cries. Not the tears of someone who is broken. But the tears of someone who has healed. Who has integrated her past into her present. Who has learned that redemption isn't forgetting your mistakes. It's using them to help others avoid the same mistakes. She frames the shirt next to the original one. The A-10 Warthog doesn't change much over the years. New avionics, upgraded engines, better targeting systems. But at its core, it remains what it was designed to be, a flying gun. An instrument of precision and power. A weapon in the hands of skilled people who understand that their decisions matter. Elena, now a full colonel with 17 years of service and 156 combat hours logged, stands on the flight line at dawn. The sun is rising over Mountain Home Air Force Base, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. An A-10 is being prepared by crew chiefs who know her reputation, who know that Major Elena Reaper Cross is a legend. But they also know that she's just a pilot. A very good pilot. An exceptionally experienced pilot. But still human. Still capable of fear. Still capable of growth. Elena walks to the A-10. She runs her hands over the fuselage, feeling the weight of history, the weight of responsibility. This aircraft has seen combat. This aircraft has seen pilots live and die. This aircraft represents the absolute commitment to one principle: bring your people home. She climbs into the cockpit. Slides her helmet on. Feels the familiar pressure of the oxygen mask. The weight of the ejection seat beneath her. The stick in her right hand, the stick she hasn't truly flown in 5 years, only ridden along as an instructor. But today, she's flying. Today, she has a training mission with young pilots. Today, she'll show them what competence looks like. What courage looks like. What it means to carry the weight of other people's lives and still get into the sky. The engines start with a roar that hasn't changed in 30 years. The Warthog is ready. Elena keys her radio, Mountain Home Control, Reaper Flight, 2-ship formation, requesting clearance for training mission to range. Reaper Flight, you are cleared for takeoff. Welcome back to the sky, Major. Elena smiles. She pushes the throttles forward, and the A-10 starts rolling down the runway. The G-forces press her back into the seat. The world expands as altitude increases. At 2,000 feet, she retracts the landing gear and watches the Earth fall away. She's home. Not in Oregon. Not in a small town pretending she was ordinary. But here, in the sky, where she belongs. Where she's always belonged. Elena banks the aircraft left and calls to her wingman, Reaper 2, this is Reaper Lead. Let's go teach these young pilots what it means to be a warrior. Copy, Reaper Lead. Right behind you. The two A-10s disappear into the morning sky, heading toward the range where simulation becomes reality, where training becomes life-saving, where young pilots learn that the bravest thing you can do is keep flying. In a small Oregon town, a hiking trail is marked with Elena's name. She still leads wilderness trips in summer, the Air Force is flexible with her schedule. The town calls her the Wilderness Warrior. She doesn't correct them. In Seattle, passengers from Flight 926 gather every year on the anniversary. They call each other and remember the day they came so close to not having any tomorrows. They send pictures to Elena, showing her the lives they've lived in the time she gave them. In the Air Force, Elena's story is told to every new class of pilots. The young men and women who will carry the sky in their hands. They're told about the Disney shirt. About the 3 soldiers. About what it means to make a mistake and keep flying anyway. And somewhere, always, Elena is in a cockpit. Not because she has to be. But because she chooses to be. Because the sky still calls her. Because there are always people who need saving. And Elena Cross, Major Reaper Cross, Colonel Cross, she always answers.